Hello everyone and welcome back to the Clutch Chess International. Now there were a lot of good games played yesterday in the chess world and we're going to show a few of them, but this one is special. And if you're wondering about what's this whole prestigious E-Club, well, it's actually a group of elite grandmasters who take it upon themselves to promote the greatest opening in chess there is, which of course you know what I'm talking about. So without further ado, let's check out this game as it's really a wild one. So, Fabi with the white pieces opens with e4. We have e5 by Wesley, knight to f3, we have knight to c6, and bishop to c4. So going for the Italian game, we have bishop to c5, and here is another position where it is possible to go for the Evans gambit. Now, did Fabi go for it? Yes, he did. He plays b4, and sorry about that, the Evans gambit is on the board. And how will Wesley reply? Will he accept the gambit or will he decline it? Well, this is of course one of those gambits that is best refuted by accepting it, so Wesley goes for it. Bishop captures on b4, c3, challenging the bishop, and we always mention that you could go, let's say, a5, you could go to d6 to e7, c5 isn't all that impressive, white just plays d4 and gets a very strong center. And it's basically the same if you go back with the bishop to c5. It's basically the same as if you've captured the pawn with the knight and then you go back, so not something you want to do. So here bishop to e7 by Wesley, and now just d4, so grabbing the massive center, and now knight to a5. Playing yet again with the knight, but white will also have to waste a move to get rid of the bishop. Now, even though knight e5 is the most common move here, then you allow black to capture, and go d5, and, well, just to ruin your center. For example, captures, so you can go back to e3 with the knight, and after, let's say, queen a5, black is doing very well. So here Fabi instead goes bishop to d3. He keeps the tension, but now Wesley goes d6 and again offers Fabi his pawn back. And now Fabi captures it. So, we do have to mention that queen a4 check doesn't win the knight, since after c6 the queen defends the knight, if some of you were thinking about that. So after d6, we have d captures on e5, Fabi goes after his pawn, we have d captures and knight captures on e5, and now knight to f6. Wesley just makes room for the king to castle, both players castle here, castles, and queen to c2. Gets the queen out of the way, prepares and makes room for the rook to enter the game, and so on. So here, bishop to d6. Wesley moves back Fabi's knight, and Fabi does go back, but with tempo, as he is threatening e5 now to win material. And there is one game where bishop to g4 was played. It was played in 2013 in Bundesliga. Alexei Shirov was able to beat Florian Hanke, where Hanke played bishop to g4 move. But here we have knight back to c6, and it is already as of move 12 that we have a completely new game. So this is one line of the Evans that where black doesn't have at least an extra pawn. However, he's not behind on development. So black is doing well here. So Fabi continues, bishop to g5, pins the knight, and h6 now. We have bishop to h4, and now Wesley goes for g5 as well, not worried about expanding those pawns in front of his king. Bishop to g3, and now he trades, captures, and now even g4, preparing to go h5 later on, and maybe even h4. So Wesley takes it upon himself to attack white. So knight to h4, a good square for the knight. Later on you can maybe come to f5, and now knight to e5. Wesley also finds an excellent outpost for his knight. You cannot go f4, as g captures on f3 en passant will happen, so you have to go bishop back to e2, and now rook to e8. Again, continuing development. Fabi also needs to finish developing, so knight to d1. You could maybe develop the rook, go knight to f1, knight to e3, and then even bring this knight over to f5, which would be great. And here b6, Wesley wants to develop his bishop to this diagonal. However, rook a to d1, developing the rook to the open d file, putting it in front of black's queen, so queen e7, and now rook f to e1. And here, while you could continue with bishop to b7, then you really give white the f5 square, and Wesley doesn't want to do this. So instead of going bishop to b7, he goes bishop to e6. Also a nice square for the bishop, and you keep an eye on the f5 square. But now, as we mentioned, Fabi goes knight to f1. He wants to remaneuver this knight over to f5, and then both of the knights will be controlling f5. So you will always have at least one knight on f5. So rook a to d8. Now Wesley finishes development, and now knight to e3. Fabi continues with his plan. We have queen to c5. Of course, now Wesley is expecting knight f5, so you don't want it to come with a double attack on the queen on e7 and on the pawn on h6, so getting the queen out of harm's way. And knight e to f5, now going for the h6 pawn. Wesley defends it by first capturing on d1, and after Fabi recaptures, now not going to defend it with the king, but rather just h5. Now also you keep an eye on the g4 pawn, and everything is nice. And you could bring your knight over to h6, let's say king h7, bring this knight over here. However, you don't really have anything going for you. And also Wesley's queen to c5 move is very tricky, because even if you go for something like this, then h4 could be very strong. Now knight cannot capture because of queen captures knight, and if you go for this, then g3 is very strong since the queen pins the f2 pawn. So after h5 we have rook to d4 by Fabi. The rook will do a lot of good here, adding another defender to the d4 pawn, to the e4 pawn. And now Wesley goes back, queen to f8. And now the queen will do a very good job here, will guard the h6 square, so the knight cannot jump, and well, maybe freeze the c5 square for the pawn, as this c5 pawn is a bit weak for now. So queen to d2. Also, the queen on f8 prevents any rook to d8 ideas, but also now with queen to d2, Fabi wants to go queen to g5 with check, so Wesley prevents it. Knight to h7, guards the g5 square, and now pawn to a4. The pawn will no longer be a weakness, and you will prevent black from expanding a lot on the queen side. So knight back to c6 by Wesley, putting pressure on Fabi's rook, and here, well, you could play a lot of things here. You could move the rook, but Fabi goes for knight to h6 check first, king g7, and now knight to f5 check, checking where the king will go. And here Wesley goes for g6. He says, I'm very happy here. It's a very nice square for the king. And now it's a super complicated position. A lot of things can go wrong here, and a lot of things can go well here. And it's a question, what do you do here? I'm not going to ask you to pause the video or anything, because there are too many lines for us to cover. We're just going to show some of them. So here, the question is, are you worried about knight captures on d4? That's basically what you want to answer. You could go bishop to b5 to also pin the knight, as black's rook is on e8. You could go for knight to h4 check first, as now also the queen covers the knight, so you don't have to worry about that. However, Fabi went for bishop to d3, and it's a very dangerous move. However, queen to f4 was also very interesting, as now you offered the rook on d4, and it's well, it's black's black to move whether he goes for the rook or not. If knight captures on d4, then you again get a very strong center, and let's say after f6, keeping an eye on the g5 square, you have this, well, you have a lot of ideas here. First of all, bishop captures on g4 doesn't work, because after the pawn captures, queen captures, then you can block with the knight, and after f4, the problem is black has this queen captures on h6 move, and after, of course, captures, you end up being down a whole rook. So this will not be possible. However, after this f6 move, you could go for knight to h4 check, and this is now very dangerous. However, finding such disgusting engine lines, of course, is not easy in a rapid game. For example, king g7, and now the spectacular bishop to c4. It is in the position, and now you will remove the defender of the f5 square, or if black goes after the pawn, then you get knight 6 to f5 with check, king to g8, and now knight to g6, and black is lost. The queen has really no good squares. If you try queen f7, you just lose the queen after knight to h6 check. So you could move the queen somewhere, but there aren't all that many squares for the queen. Queen b4 runs into queen h6 with queen to g7 checkmate next, and it's just a terrible position for black. So queen to f4 was very interesting here. However, Fabi goes for bishop to d3, which is also very interesting, as, well, the king is on this diagonal, and the king doesn't really have any good squares. However, Wesley has a very strong defensive move here. So feel free to pause the video and try to find an excellent defensive resource for Wesley here, while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on not grabbing the rook. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's knight to g5. Knight to g5 is crucial in defending this position, as it cuts off the queen's defense of the knight here. So now if this knight moves, you always have king captures the knight here. and that's super important. Otherwise, you would have like moves like e5 threatening all sorts of nasty discoveries, and when this knight moves, the queen would still guard the knight, so it would be very difficult for black. So now with knight to g5 included, Wesley's position is looking pretty good. So here queen to f4 by Fabi now, and now f6 by Wesley, adding another defender to the knight, and also if this knight moves, you also have an additional square for the king. So bishop to b5, now Fabi says, okay, we now trade rooks, so knight captures on d4, bishop captures on e8 with check, queen captures, and now c captures on d4. Now Fabi gets his strong center without giving up the exchange. We have bishop captures on f5, we have knight captures on f5, you have to capture with the knight, otherwise you lose it. So knight captures and the queen captures on e4. Wesley grabs a pawn, and Fabi really shouldn't trade queens here. So he goes knight to h4 with check, king f7, and now queen captures on c7 with check. As we mentioned, that c7 pawn is a little bit weak, so Fabi grabs his pawn back, and now queen to e7. Wesley wants the trade queens, and even though white has a passed e-pawn, Wesley has a 2-to-1 advantage here on the queen side, and it will be very easy for him to create a pass pawn of his own. So queen to c4 check by Fabi, and again queen e6. Fabi declines the queen trade, and d5, he pushes his passed pawn. Queen to d6, Wesley blocks the passed pawn, and now queen to d3. With ideas of maybe queen to g6 check, and then maybe you can create some threats. So queen to e5, not worrying about this check, and also inviting Fabi to start pushing his pass pawn. Now pushing the pass pawn is super dangerous, because if d6, king e8, d7 check, king here, it will be very hard for you to do anything more. It will be very easy for black to just pick up that pawn, and if knight g6, you could very easily run into queen to e1 check, king to h2, and now a tricky move like knight to f3 check, which is super complicated, but it will win the game for black. For example, g captures, queen captures with check, you're gonna go king h1, and now g captures, threatening checkmate. Knight has to block, as now the g2 square is covered, but now queen e1 check, king to h2 and f2, threatening to bring another queen into the game. So knight to f3, attacking black's queen, but now you play f1 and bring a knight into the game with check, king g1, and now let's say queen e3 check. And after all is said and done, you will also win this pawn, and you will have a 4-to-2 advantage, of course, in a completely winning endgame. So allowing Fabi to push the pawn isn't all that great for him. So Fabi instead goes queen g6 check. We have king to e7, and now knight to f5 with check. The king hunt begins. We have king to d8, and now king to h2 first, improving the safety of his own king, which is very important. And now Wesley also finds a brilliant resource, knight to e4. And the idea is, well, you want to capture here, you want to play queen to e1, and you want to deliver checkmate with queen to h1 check. However, it's still Fabi's move, so queen to g8 check with Fabi, king to d7, and now queen to f7 with check. King back to d8, and now Fabi goes for knight to g7, going for knight to e6 check, and hopefully you can end the game somehow by checkmating the black king. However, here Wesley finds the very impressive h4. The g3 pawn is pinned, so you cannot capture. Already there's that threat. But Fabi continues. Knight to e6 check, king to c8, and then now comes queen to g8 with check. So queen to g8 check, and now of course if king d7, then this is checkmate. You cannot allow this. So king goes to b7, and here is where the magic happens. Here, Fabi has to go queen to g7 or just pick up the pawn. You should grab this pawn and continue playing this, because after captures and captures, we just continue the game. The point is that Wesley doesn't have queen captures on d5. If you capture on d5, then queen g7 wins the game on the spot. Whatever you do, you no longer have the control of the c7 square, so you can't really go here. And if you try something like, let's say, king to a6, then just knight here checks and forks the queen. So it would be, of course, losing for black. So after king b7, this is the way to go. However, Fabi played queen to h7 with check, but now it's a bit different. King to a6, and here Fabi grabs the h4 pawn, but now it no longer works. So feel free to pause the video and win this game for Wesley while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on paying attention, as we already mentioned Black's plan. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's knight captures on f2. And now you see that there's no good way to defend against this checkmate. And the g4 pawn is defended, so you can't even make any room for the king, even if the knight moved. So not much for Fabi to do here. If you try to escape, Black just pushes you back and again delivers checkmate. So after this queen to h4 move, we have knight captures on f2, and now Fabi tries queen to h8. He wants to try and deliver some checks here, but queen to e1 by Wesley. Wesley says this will not do. And now if you go queen to c, let's say c8 check, king a5, there are no good checks. Queen covers c3, so you cannot continue checking the black king. So here Fabi tried knight to c5. Last resort devious idea, where if the knight is captured, then queen to c8 check really does give you a perpetual, because after this and check, you're gonna go this and this check. And now you cannot block with the queen because queen picks up the knight. So you'd have to run away with the king, but now the queen just follows. King c2, you're gonna go queen to c5 with check, king b1, queen here with check, and so on. You will have a perpetual. However, after knight to c5 check, Wesley just played king to f5, a5, and now comes, well, whatever comes next doesn't really matter, because it was in this position on move 53 that Fabiano Caruana resigned the game, and an excellent victory for Wesley. So against the Evans gambit. So here you resign because whatever you do, let's say this check or this check, doesn't really do anything. King b4 just escapes, and after queen f8, let's say captures, and there are no more checks. Any repetition is nowhere to be found. So Fabi, of course, resigned, and what a game. So even though he lost using the Evans gambit, you can see that the positions that arose over the board were extremely complicated, and had Fabi found some similar moves, other than that bishop to d3 line, where Wesley found the incredibly resourceful knight to g5, it could have gone either way. So as you can see, even though these are two elite players, it's not the problem is not within the Evans gambit. It's just it's just that it happens. And it's very important to mention that Fabi got such incredible positions with the Evans gambit against a player like Wesley So, who is a World Fisher Random champion. So Wesley is not, it's not a problem for Wesley to play weird positions or positions he's never seen. So getting excellent positions like these against Wesley with the Evans gambit is incredibly impressive. So yeah, even though he lost, he joins the prestigious E Club, and we can only hope that others will follow in his footsteps. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Simon Servilla, Grant Miller, Brian Carrion, Gregory Romeser, and Ogene Yokpeme Orobor for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the Clutch Chess International. I just realized something happened with my board. It shifted a little bit, so sorry about that. I didn't realize that while I was recording. But yeah, checking up on your wonderful suggestions, and of course whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.